S197 chassis showed up in 2005. It brought a new retro look, new engine options, and even a new suspension. Now, a lot felt that the SN95 outgoing chassis, while still based on the Fox chassis, was the last of the true muscle car Mustangs, as the new car was a lot more refined and drove completely different. As a lot of SN95s like the 0304 Cobras that became legendary cars over the years, but how does the SN95 stack up to the S197? Well, today we'll take a look at both chassis. The SN95 Mustang showed up in 1994, replacing the outgoing Fox body. Now, this was a Fox 4 chassis, which basically meant it was still a Fox body chassis, but it had some improvements for the new body style. The original body, when it came out, a lot of people weren't a huge fan of the curves and the different look, but eventually enthusiasts warmed up to this car and actually earned Motor Trend Car of the Year honors for 1994. Now, Bud McGaldy was the chief designer of this car and brought a lot of the classic elements such as the side scoops, the tri-bar taillights, and other things to give it a more modern feel. Then Emmeline King designed an entirely new dual cockpit interior, which was way different than the Fox body, but gave the car a much sportier appeal. Now, when the car was originally designed, there were three versions. You had Rambo, which is a very aggressive looking car. You had Bruce Jenner, which is a very tame looking car, almost like a Taurus. And then the winner was Arnold Schwarzenegger, which basically combined the two design elements to create the car you see behind me. And this design stayed the same through 1998, and then got a redesign with sharper edges from 99 through 04, known as the New Edge cars. Now, as far as SN95 goes, the Cobras were the king, particularly the 0304 Cobra, which is now legendary with its 390 horsepower supercharged engine, T56, and 12-second factory quarter miles. And as we all know, it is very easy to make that car a lot faster. Now, again, the SN95 was a very popular chassis, particularly towards the end. Then in 05, the S197 showed up and changed the game. The S197 Mustang showed up in 2005 and ran through the 2014 model year. Now, the new S197 was a completely new car. New body, new chassis, new engine options, and a new style suspension. Now, also when the GT showed up, it had 300 horsepower from the new 4.6-liter 3-valve engine, which is definitely more powerful than the outgoing GTs. Now, these cars actually had no Cobra option, but in 2007 the GT500 returned, and with 500 horsepower was the most powerful Mustang ever produced at the time. Now, these cars were very popular with enthusiasts, especially in 2011 when the Coyote showed up under the hood. The Coyote had over 100 horsepower more than the 3-valve, was now backed by a 6-speed transmission, and made for a very fast car. And at the end of the product cycle from 2013 through 2014, you had the new GT500 with a 5.8-liter engine, making 662 horsepower, and again at the time, the most powerful Mustang ever built. Now, these cars do drive a lot different than the SN95s, so let's take them both for a test drive. The car I'm driving is a 1995 Mustang Cobra, and this was basically top of the line for 1995. 240 horsepower. Took an experienced driver using every ounce of that power to sneak these cars into the high 13s. So by today's standards, you know, they weren't fast, but again, in 95, that was pretty quick. The only Mustang that was faster was the Cobra R, but required a racing license, so this was the fastest thing the general public could buy. Starting in 96, you went to the 2-valve in the GT, and then the 4-valve in the Cobra, which were completely different animals. Now, driving this car, it feels a lot older than it should. I mean, these cars have a lot of the Fox body characteristics as far as the chassis. It's a much better chassis than the Fox, but it's very familiar as far as how it drives and how it performs. These cars had 13-inch brakes, so the brakes work pretty well. But the biggest thing about driving these cars is just the feel at SN95. You know, the chassis and the whole interior has a very cool feel about it, and they sound great. I mean, there's nothing like the sound of that pushrod 5-liter motor. I mean, the 96 and up GTs were very slow and pedestrian compared to these cars, just because those were more of like a sedan engine than an actual performance engine when they first came out. But this sounds good. Like I said, definitely not a rocket, but you can't be, especially in a convertible, it just sounds good when you get on it. And overall, these cars, they just ride nice. I mean, this one's got 88,000 miles on it, and I would jump in this car and drive it anywhere and not really have any concerns about it. Like I said, it's still a very solid car. Still drives great going down the road. Now, this one's mostly stock. It's got 373 gears, a short throw shifter, Flowmaster exhaust, and yeah, Flowmaster is still the classic sound for the pushrod motor. And one of the nice things with the SN95s too is that these cars did have modular engines in them at one point, which makes it very easy to do engine swaps. So if you want to do a modern anything, a Coyote, 3-valve, whatever, you can swap them into these cars. And Coyote swaps on these are very, very popular. Remember Mustang, our project car that we took factory stock racing, that was a Coyote swap. And it's very, very straightforward to do. The SN95 engine bay is nice and large, even for a smaller car. Gives you lots of options for engine swaps. They make all the right noises. Now the S197 we're driving is gotta have it race. This used to be our race car back in the day. And these cars, as I said, they're 412 horsepower new in 2013. These were easy mid 12-second cars when they were stock. I mean, this car actually went to MIR with it. And with a set of drag radials, we raised the rev limiter. This car actually ran 12.0s bone stock. So these are quick cars. So this car was ordered as a base model. So we got the Recaro seats because they were lighter, 373 gears, and that was it. There were no other options. Just gotta have it green with a 6-speed manual. And these are fun cars. I mean, this car, it still has a solid axle like the SN95. So the suspension's very similar, but it's a 3-link instead of a 4-link. It does keep the rear planted a lot more, especially when you're in cornering, but it also works great in a straight line, which is what's made these Coyote cars extremely popular with drag racers. You know, whether you're going the 6R80 or the 6-speed, they're very quick in stock form and very, very easy to make a lot faster. And there's obviously a lot of drag suspension available for these chassis too. I would say second only to the Fox Body Coupe as far as popularity with drag racers. Acceleration compared to what it was like driving the other car, I mean, it's not even in the same boat. The Coyote obviously responds a lot more. This car also has 373s. This has an MBRP race exhaust, which sounds great, but the sound of the Coyote still can't touch that push rod. I mean, that push rod sound is just classic Mustang, and all these things work amazing. The Coyote is not, in my opinion, the greatest sounding engine. I think actually the 2-valve, 3-valve, and 4-valve all sounded better than this engine did. But you can't deny that it works. And the chassis works. I mean, these are very comfortable cars, roomy interior. They kind of got away from the dual cockpit look they'd had for the SN95. The interior, you know, you have more of a flat dash kind of console setup, but it definitely works. I mean, I've been critical of these cars a little bit before because the interior is very heavy on the plastic. You got plastic dash, plastic doors, plastic console. It doesn't necessarily give it a high-end feel, but these cars were built to perform. You know, they weren't built to be, you know, luxurious interiors. And then they get better over the years. You know, and what we did, you know, when we talked about S197 versus S550, yeah, it's easy to say, you know, as the cars get newer, obviously they're going to get better at a lot of things. Your interior gets better, your chassis gets better, all that kind of stuff. But there's always something about the previous generation that keeps us coming back to them, and that's happened throughout the history of Mustang. I mean, even, I'm not going to say probably there's not a lot of Fox people going back to a Mustang 2, but besides that, people still love the Gen 1 cars. Even if you're driving a brand new Mustang GT, you still probably enjoy driving a Fox body. And it's the same thing with the SN95 and S197. I mean, if it's the first Mustang you had or the first car you went fast in or whatever, there's just something about those cars that will never leave you. And that's one of the things that makes Mustangs so great, is that you just kind of get attached to it and it becomes a part of you. And, you know, whichever one you happen to like. And it's funny because Mustang enthusiasts will argue and argue over which one is the best. But at the end of the day, they all have something that makes them special, and that's why we love them. Now, let's be honest, on paper, the S197 does everything better. The engines make more power, the chassis works better. It's an overall better performance car. When it comes down to style and feel, though, you can't go wrong with the SN95. And these cars just kind of have that old school muscle car feel, especially the pushrod ones. It just gives you that sound you just cannot get from a modular engine. Now, which one's right for you? Well, it really depends, but either way, you can't go wrong with either one of these Mustangs.